My name's Inkster. I am I guess I'm an Alberta-based media artist. It took a long time for me to get my head around that. I moved around a lot, so yeah, Alberta's my home. I work in predominantly filmmaking, documentary, experimental video, media art, and I also am an educator on the side. And so I've been very fortunate. I grew up in central Canada, came to Lethbridge about 5 years ago, and the first couple of years I worked on a documentary with the film board. And then the next couple of years I taught in the new media department. And now I am the manager of education and public programs at the Southern Alberta Art Gallery. So yeah, I like to kind of hop around, move around. I find that collecting people's stories, you've got to move around to do that. So that kind of explains my career path or lack thereof. New media for me, I think it's a catchphrase, not a catchphrase, it's a phenomenon that a lot of people have been exploring in the last decade or so. But to my mind, new media is simply a tool. And I feel that if you're a new media artist or a digital artist, your job is the same as storytellers since the beginning of time. You have to figure out what you're going to do with the tool to reach an audience. And so with new media, we have all sorts of really dynamic, digitally based programs that can help us to tell or show stories and illustrate stories in a new way. But it's a tool. It's a tool. So I always ask my colleagues, my peers, and students, and my mentors, what are we trying to say? It's great that we have a camera. It's great that we have a computer. It's great that we have, Adobe CS17 or whatever. But what are we trying to say? And oftentimes I find when you get down to it, it's the same kind of human principles of storytelling that have existed for eons. And I think a big part, especially for students that are in their undergraduate experience, just getting their heads around the idea of being artists or having a Bachelor of Fine Arts, one of the most difficult and important things that needs to happen at this time of life is to find one's voice. We all have media that we admire, whether it be games or blockbuster films or art house films or whatever. But the point is, as an artist, we're not trying to replicate, we're trying to innovate. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges with all these amazing tools that make production so accessible. We have to ask ourselves the hard question, what is my voice? What can I contribute to the cultural landscape in my community? Whether it's local, regional, or national, or international. So I think that's a toughie. It takes some time to figure out what your voice is, but it's a step not to be skipped.
Yeah, definitely.
Hard though.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard. So, I think there's that that temptation to want to make work that looks like the work of others that have already succeeded, but it's been done, and you can do well. I don't mean to be dismissive. It's been done, and those people that have made those articulations in Hollywood or documentary or gaming, the people that are really famous have found their voice. So if you really want to kind of go for gold, you have to ask yourself that same question. It's a weird thing, because I've been asked that a lot. And the answer that I come up with is in literature. It's not necessarily other filmmakers or other visual artists per se. I find a lot of the books I read when I was growing up inform the way that I see and understand the world. So those principles of storytelling and narrative, I go like this, and the pyramid of the structure of the story, that is very meaningful to me in all the work that I do, even if it's not narrative or if it's experimental, storytelling. And authors come to mind, Toni Morrison, thinkers like bell hooks, and yeah, a lot of writers are the ones that have really made a big impact on me. But you know, that being said, don't get me wrong, I love a great movie, and but the works of early cinema verite directors, documentary directors, made a big impression on me as well. So. And I love a good Scorsese film. I'm a fan. Not so much of his Leo phase of his career, but pre-Leo is all about Scorsese. So. Yeah. Well, I think the beauty of it is there is a richness, and I think you're right, that's a great word, the richness of a book that, and you think you can convey it with the tool of media. I mean, if I could do a lot of things, if I could write a novel, I would write a novel, but I have a greater affinity to work with video cameras, so I do that. And yeah, I think the thing about it for me is growing up is that books, more so than television or, of course, you know, visual arts that I didn't have a huge exposure to, although I grew up in the nation's capital, I found that books helped me to understand other parts of the world that weren't mine. So, you know, I could pick up a book and understand what it was like to be a wealthy dilettante in the 1920s when I read The Great Gatsby. Or, you know, it's just on and on, pick a story, and it kind of is a portal, a gateway into walking in another person's shoes. And I found that, you know, because of the long literary tradition of storytelling, I mean, there's just a lot of stories to pick from, so you can kind of travel through time, and you can see the strength of a story in terms of which ones have survived through the ages. You know, Shakespeare, I mean, that's been hundreds and hundreds of years, and it's still being performed. You know, by people in the north, you know, people in prisons, people in Stratford, Ontario. So it's kind of like, I'm fascinated by the strength of the story. And yeah, I hope that people who engage in new media understand that they're part of that tradition as well. It's not necessarily new to be part of a storytelling tradition. I think we kind of have to know what our cultural history is as we step into the future to try and make our own way. I kind of get, yeah, I kind of shake my head or get under-inspired when people think they're manifesting genius that no one has ever seen before. And I love that enthusiasm. But it's kind of like, I feel like those artists, emerging artists, young, you know, people, undergraduate students, we've failed somehow if they don't know enough about the foundations of storytelling. So, and I'm saying we fail because it's like that intergenerational tradition of being able to set role models or models for history of a cultural expression. I think that should be part of, you know, getting your head around being a cultural producer.